What is up, guys? This is Nas, and today we will be learning React.js from the beginnings, from the fundamentals, all right? Now, before we get started, I want to say, go ahead and help us out, and with the YouTube algorithm, smash that like button as many times as you possibly can, right? And it does not hurt anybody. It only makes us happier, and it makes you happy because you get to smash that like button. Okay, subscribe, of course, for more videos like this, because, of course, we work hard to put this out for you. But other than that, let's go ahead and get this party started. React.js 101. Let's get straight into it. So, what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn a few different things. Part 1, what is React.js? Okay, talking about how it does it work, what is it made of, and how do we use it. We're going to talk about how we use React.js to build fast applications with components, which is probably the most important part of React.js, which is components. You'll learn here in a second, okay? We will talk about why React.js and why it's become such a popular framework library, right? And why you should learn it, of course. We will talk about how to build HTML using something called JSX, which is very particular to React.js. Also, we'll talk about how to save data. So one of the most important things, of course, is saving data in your application using something called state. Again, a new topic you might know. And we will even build your first React.js project. Let's get into it real quickly. All right, so let's get started. So what is React.js? That is the question. Pretty simple answer. It is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces using declarative code. Now, what I mean by declarative code, let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. Check this out. So declarative code is pretty simple, where, for example, where each line right here, each line of code declares what each element of the app is, right? So what do I mean by that? For example, you can see here there's a header component, a cart items, and cart total. What this says is that this header declares what the element is about. So this means, of course, it's a header, right? If I say cart items, that means it's cart items, right? If the component name is cart total, for example, right? To me, it makes sense that that's the cart total, which is probably going to be something around here. If I'm going to look at the header, that's probably going to be the header component here. And this is what it means to have declarative code. And React.js is about using declarative code to create beautiful user interfaces, just like this, as you can see. All right, moving on. So, okay, benefits of learning React.js. Really simple. Low learning curve, reusable components, and performance. Learning this library should not be that hard. Of course, it takes some time, but if you put in the work, that's all that matters, right? Reusable components, of course, because, right, this is what allows us to build humongous applications like Facebook, for example. Right, let's go, keep going. With reusable components, which is probably one of the most important parts of React.js, right? It describes what does it do? It describes a section of the UI and how it should appear and function. It's honestly just as simple as that, right? So, for example, we'll talk more a little bit about components later on, but one reusable component, for example, let's say this. You see how this right here is like the similar HTML as this? It just has different data. Well, this, my friend, is a reusable component. You can see here in our case, the component here will be like, for example, header, right? A cart items component right here, and a cart total component right here. And we'll learn just how to build them. So who uses React.js? Well, Facebook, for one, uses it. Of course, they just fully rebuilt the whole application using React.js, all right? Also, Tesla, the whole Tesla application, which is really cool, this whole Tesla application on your mobile device is fully built with something called React Native, all right? Netflix, even, their whole app is using React.js. And there's so many more apps that are currently being built with React, right? For React.js, we have number 1 in terms of popularity. You can see Google Trends React is very much going up right here. Angular is right here, and Vue is kind of there as well. But React has very much superseded a lot of different frameworks, right? In terms of work and so many more things. Beautiful. All right, moving on. Stack Overflow survey right here shows us that React is the second framework, the most popular framework out there for developers. jQuery is right here, but jQuery has been there for a long time. Awesome. Moving on. Let's go ahead. Currently with React.js, guys, there's 54,000 jobs on Just Indeed right here. Check this out. 54. You can see right here in the screenshot, it actually says 54,000 jobs, which is insane, and is going to keep increasing as this framework gets more popular. All right, so how do you build fast application using components? Again, this is the pillar, the foundation of how React was made, right? That's a good question. So with components, what are components? Well, as we talked about really briefly, they're reusable UI elements. Just kind of how you have a header element or some kind of a section on a piece of, some kind of a section on your website, that's a reusable element, okay? Right? Just kind of like this, right? This an element could be a reusable element, okay? So just basically all it is it's JavaScript functions that accept inputs. What do I mean by that? Give me 1 second, I'll explain it. Right? Describes how a section of the UI should appear and function. It describes how a section of the UI should appear and function. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at it. Well, if you think, for example, let's say we have this awesome, right, Amazon cart. This is an Amazon cart page, okay? Amazon cart page, right? If you think about this, what do you see could be a component, right? Kind of think of a component as like a section of a website. Well, if you think about this, this could potentially be a section of a website. This right here, right? This right here could be potentially a section of a website right here. Even this could potentially be a section of a website right here. Or even this, for example, right? Or this, any block that you see can be a component. So if we, for example, keep going, right? Look at this. Well, first we have the header, okay? Then we might have, for example, the cart items. That could be a component itself. And then that could be the cart total. And every single section here, every single component here is almost, think of it as it has its own brain and has its own state, right? It has its own brain, has its own state, and has its own view. That's the interesting part about it. It has its own view, right? So that's when we said this is why, right? It's individual UI elements, right? Individual UI elements. That's what React.js is used for. So for example, another component you can use is, for example, a cart item component right here, right? Which can be used. You can see here I have this one cart item, but then I'm reusing it in multiple places. So that's the really cool part about React is you can simply just have one component and they can be reused in multiple places. Now in our case, let's take a look at how it's actually being coded up. So if we have this Amazon cart right here, okay? Well, let's think about this. We could have, for example, a header, a cart items, and a cart total, right? And this maps to what? Well, this maps to a few different things, right? It maps to header, maps to, of course, this header component. Cart items maps to what? To this component. And the cart total maps to this component, right? And they're simply its own HTML blocks, okay? Now, what might happen is you can have components within components. So for example, this cart items component, right, which is this one right here, right? It might have, for example, individual cart item component, which is this one right here, right? Now, of course, here, don't worry about all this stuff. This is very confusing. It's a loop. It's looping through an array, and all that's going on is basically it's showing the different components. So these components, in terms of HTML, are the same. It's just that we are passing in different data. For example, this image right here is different, and the title here is different as well, right? That's what's being different with that. Now, let's do a test run here. So check this out. Let's draw out a components for a Facebook web app, okay? So let's take a look at this. If we have here, okay, a Facebook web app, what could be a component? Well, if we know, one thing we know, for example, is that this could be a component. The header could be a component. This is the current Facebook web app. This could be a component right here, right? It's, again, anything you see as a block. This could be a component right here as well, right? What else could be a component? Well, this could be a component, right? This could also be a component. This could be a component. This could be a component, right? This could be a component. Everything you see that's like a block can basically be a component. And that's what we said. React.js is all about basically what? UI elements, right? Elements, right? That's what React.js is about. All right, let's go ahead and move on really quickly. What else do we have? Well, so let's go ahead and actually build your first component. Check this out, all right? Here's our first component we have. Well, it's pretty simple. It's basically we have our component, it's a function, right? And it's importing some React right here. And we have a div class name app, and we are simply saying an h1 with a hello there. It's as simple as that. So if we go ahead and take a look at this, right, what's going to happen? Here is our React.js application in StackBlitz, which is something I highly recommend you check it out. StackBlitz is a very easy way for us to create a React.js application. It's very simple, right? This is the whole component right here. It's called the app component. And whatever I change in here, let's say, for example, hello there, Nazari, my name, right? That's going to directly translate to what we see on the right-hand side, right? It's as simple as that. Now, how does this work? Well, you can see that React, what happens is if React uses something called a React DOM.render. What that does is we have this render function, right? And that render function takes in the app component, which comes in from here, right? We are importing app from app, which is, of course, right here, okay? And where are we putting that app HTML? Well, we're putting that where? We are putting that inside document.getElementById root. Where is that coming from? Check this out. If I go to public in this HTML, look at this, div ID root. So it actually looks at the HTML and says, hey, where do I put my HTML? Well, my whole React component, well, I will put it inside div ID root. And so every single HTML, every single React app will have an ID root in there, just so you know. Cool. So that is basically our first app application. Let's go ahead and move on. Now, to build our applications, what you've seen is something really interesting, right? You've seen HTML. But guess what? It's actually not HTML. It's actually something called JSX, okay? JSX. So we use JSX to create components. It's as simple as that, right? With that, you can see, what is JSX? Well, it is basically just JavaScript XML. That's the word for it, and you might be confused all the way here for a second, right? But it allows us to write HTML in React.js. This right here is JSX. It's as simple as that, right? And it makes it easier for us to write HTML in React.js, because at the end of the day, all of this is being written in JavaScript, in a .js file, not in a .html file, but in the .js file, right? That is the big difference. And so we have to use something called JSX to allow us to write that. That's why we have here class name and not class is equal to something, right? That's the big difference. So let's take a look at what is JSX and why do we need to use it. Well, check this out, right? JSX is very, very helpful. It allows us, number one, to use JavaScript calculations. That's part one. But you can also use variables, right? And you can also use, for example, like loops. So as an example here, we have, let's say we have an element. You see, this is an element. Well, this right here, my friend, is JSX, okay? This H1, even though it looks like HTML, it's actually JSX. And here I can fully do expressions called expressions. That's the really cool part about it. 10 plus 10 will actually will give me 20, right? So in the output, this will be 20. Now, another thing is variable. So for example, here, you know how we have const element is equal to h1, my name is first name. Check this out. This first name, right, is actually going to be put in here. So if my first name is equal to Naz, okay, it will show Naz here, right? That's the really cool part, all right? Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Next up, if we take a look at our, for example, this specific portion, what do we have? Well, we have, for example, a loop. You can see here, we can actually loop over a list of elements directly in JSX and actually return some value. So it allows us to very easily display, list elements or values in our application. All right. So why JSX? Well, look at this, right? Without JSX, pretty simple. It looks pretty hideous, right? We have to use something called const e React create element. We have to do this, and it just becomes very messy. With JSX, on the other hand, look at this. It's so beautiful. It just feels like it's normal HTML. Button, right? Button, right? And so forth. Unclick, this happens, and so forth. And you can put your text in here, right? That's the really cool part about it. Awesome. Moving on. So now you might be thinking, okay, so we have the HTML, but how do you style this, right? In JSX, in React.js, styling is pretty simple. You can either do inline styling or CSS using an external CSS style sheet. And there's another one called styled components. So you could take a look at that as well. components right here, components, right? Cool. So in inline styling, it's pretty simple. So for as an example here, I can directly in my HTML specify the color here, right? Specify the color. And, or for example, I can create another JavaScript object for the style, and I can just simply apply it to my element, right? And we can actually do this in our application. So if we take a look at our app right here, in our app.js, hello there. Let's add a style to this one. We'll go ahead for this h1. We'll say, for this h1, we'll say style is equal to boom, boom, boom. And let's give it, for example, color red. Boom. You see? Now this whole HTML has the color red. It's as simple as that, right? Or we can also do, for example, const my style is equal to, right? And here I can specify color red, right? So I can make it into a variable, and then I will go ahead and give it my own right here, my style as a parameter. Look at that. It's so cool. And now it's still the style of red, right? How cool is that? Is I just simply created a variable, I put that variable into a style, and now it's fully applied. Like, what? All right, move on. Another aspect you can do, for example, is you can put it into an external CSS style sheet. So here, for example, I can create an app.css or an app.js, and I can actually import app.css, right? App.css will be imported right here, and this will allow me to fully use all my CSS files in React.js. Beautiful. All right. Now, there's a question you might be asking yourself, okay, well, Naz, how do I pass in data, for example, in React.js? Well, we pass in data using something called props, right? Props. It's basically like parameters for functions, right? It's basically like parameters for our components. So if we think of them, for example, let's go ahead and take a look at this, right? What are props? Well, props it's a pretty simple thing. Well, it's arguments right here passed into React components. Think of them as functions. You know when you have a function, right? And you pass in, let's say some name prop. Well, this is a prop, except you can pass that into an actual component. For example, here we have an element, car, right? This is a component. And we're passing in a prop called brand, and we're passing the value called Ford. And so when we go ahead and have a component here, we can actually use props.brand to get us this Ford value. It's as simple as that, right? And the passing components via HTML attributes, and these right here are called HTML attributes. All right, next big question is, how do we go ahead and save data using React.js or React hooks, right? We've passed in data, right, between one component to another component, but how do we have some kind of a data storage device, I would say, right, that will allow us to fully, save some data as we go ahead, for example, log into our application, as you, for example, go to your profile page and how it says, hey, your name is Nazar, your name is Joe, or whatever it might be, right? How does that data appear in a React.js application? Well, also, this is something called using React hooks. And React hooks, in our case, is where functions that let you hook into React state and lifecycle features. Hold on, I know you're probably very confused right now, but that is okay, all right? Don't pay attention so much to this one. I want you to pay attention much more to this one right here, okay? Right, it's used to expand functionality of your app. So what we can do is we can actually store data of our component, right? So for example, you see how here this is a component called example many states. This component contains the data of age, fruit, and to-dos. Well, we can actually store this data using something called useState, and we can say, hey, our age is currently 42, our fruit is currently banana, and our to-dos is currently text, learn, hooks, right? And these right here are simply functions that will be used to change this data, right? These are functions that will be used to change this data. Okay, cool. So in that case, what is state, right? We just talked about state for a second, right? Well, state basically just represents parts of an app that can change. right? That can change. And if you think about what are parts of an app that can change, well, if you look at, for example, on an application, okay, let's say this is Facebook, right? In a news feed, right? Let's say you have the news feed here, right? The news feed here, right? Let's say this is a picture. Well, one thing that can change is, for example, the number of likes. So let's say there's 20 number of likes, right? The number 20 can change for sure. And so what we will do is we will actually save this number 20 in something called a state, right? In a state, we'll use, for example, use state, and we'll say 20, right? 20. And whenever somebody, let's say you, go ahead and click on this, the number, like the like button, we will go ahead and do, for example, let's say set likes, and we will increment it to 21, for example, right? It's as simple as that, right? And each component, in our case, each component can have its own state. Think of it as that is its own database, right? And as state changes, components re-renders. So this is why when you go ahead and click on something, right, when a user right here clicks on this element, right, this number changes. How does it know that happens? Well, pretty simple, because it goes ahead and checks basically as the state changes. Okay, I need to now re-render the application or show a new view to the user. So it goes from 20 to 21, right? That's just one example. All right, let's go ahead and move on. All right, what do we have? How React.js tracks changes now? That is a good question. Kind of how we talked about, right, in React.js, as we go ahead, if we build an application. Let's talk about this. Okay, let's think about this here for a second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this for you. Let's go ahead and build this out for you. Okay, we have here, right? Again, like I said, we have the news feed, right? We had the likes right here. Okay, and from what I remember, what we had 20, and you clicked on the like button, right? You click on the like button. Well, what will happen in React.js is React.js will go ahead, and again, the state, let's say this is our state, right? State. And our state has currently the value of, for example, the likes. Let's say in here we have likes, right? That's all it is, likes, okay? And we have likes, which is the count, and we have a function called set likes, which React gives us, right? Set likes, to go ahead and modify the likes. When you click on this, just how we talked about just recently, when you click on this, right, we do set likes to 21, right? To 21 to increment the count. Okay. What's going to happen is React.js has something called virtual DOM. I know this is a horrible drawing of the virtual DOM, but it's a virtual DOM, right? Virtual DOM, right? And a virtual DOM is simply just basically a clone of the current application. It's simply just a clone. Whenever the state changes, this state right here changes, maybe that's a like, maybe that's a user, maybe you did something else on the web page, it is going to go ahead and actually change it first on the virtual DOM. And if it sees that it made some kind of a difference, let's say on the news feed, okay, then the React.js will know, okay, so the number changed in terms of a view, then that means I need to go to just this number right here and change it. Because otherwise, without this virtual DOM, then every time you change this state, it will render the whole application, and that is not good. That means it's going to render all these different components, and that makes the application slow and just not easy to use at all. So this is why React became so smart, and they use something called virtual DOM to make sure to track those changes and to modify their view as you go on and click, for example, on Facebook, click the like button, or you click the like button on Instagram. So in that case, that's all pretty much what you learned is React.js. Now let's go ahead and take a look really quickly on how. Now let's go ahead and take a look really quickly how to build a small application, for example, with count. So we did state. Let's go ahead as we learned state, right, which is to go ahead and save data around your component. Let's create a state called count. Count, right here. and a set count function, right, which will be returned automatically, and we used to call use state, and let's say the count is currently 0, right? We're going to import here something called use state, right? Again, we're using the database of React.js, and what's going to happen is here we will go ahead and actually output the current count, right? So the current count, my count is currently count 0, okay? Then what we'll go ahead and do is we will actually create a button. Let's create a button that will increment the count. So I will go ahead and do button. Again, this is using JSX, right? I will create a button. And even though this looks like HTML, it's still not, right? It's still not fully HTML, okay? Add count, okay? You can see right here. And what's going to happen is on click of this button, I will go ahead and simply do set count, and I will say count plus equal to 1 plus 1. So what we will do is this set count is a function that gets returned from this use state functionality, okay? And I will do set count plus 1. And now if I go ahead and click on this, look at that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And however many times I go, you see, it refreshes the page. So basically, as I said, let me go ahead and remove this, right? As I go ahead, right? As I go ahead and click this button, right? As I click this button, this will change the count to count plus 1. So if it was 10, it'll be 11. And because this now changes to 11, it will re-render this whole element, right? And so that's why this becomes, for example, 20 in our case. When I say re-render, it will almost like a refresh, but it will refresh only this element, specific element right here. So that, my friends, is pretty much React.js. It's a very, very powerful framework, a very powerful library that you absolutely need to learn because the job market out there is pretty intense for this specific library. And if you're interested in learning more about React.js and building more applications just like this, I highly recommend our best course on the planet, Profit JavaScript, that will go ahead and teach you applications like this. It will teach you how to build applications like, for example, a Google Maps project, like, for example, a Twitter clone project. It will teach you React.js, the basics of React.js. It will teach you how to go ahead and actually become a full-stack developer, right? So if you're interested in that specific situation, if you're interested in becoming a developer, go ahead and click the link below, join Profit JavaScript, and we'll see you in there. Smash that like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and we will see you in the next video. Adios.